Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. We have here today a very special guest. Please welcome Andrea Giovino. Andrea, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me on, Wade.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad you could make it. I know we had things planned before. You had something coming up. I had something come up, but here
Yes.
we are. And I'm glad to get this out of the way because here lately, I'll start off by saying anybody that's watched Netflix and seen the Get Gotti documentary has probably seen your face.
hmm
Very popular show. I think it was number one for a really long time, which is a feat for Netflix because so many people watch it. So many people are daily watching it. So it's always like something might hit it for a couple of days, maybe even a week, but y'all stayed up there for a long time. How long was y'all in the top spot?
We were up there, I believe, in the States, in the United States. We were up there for a good month, but then around the world, 44 countries. In 44 countries, we were number one for over 7 weeks.
And I mean, I know that might not sound like a long time in the grand scheme of things, but when Netflix is constantly pumping out new content daily, for you to hold that top spot for
Yeah.
that long, that's huge.
Yes.
And John Gotti obviously is a very polarizing individual. I think he'll always be that way. I think 40, 50 years from now, kind of like he said in the movie that was, Armada Santi said it, but 100 years from now, they're going to remember him. And that's true. They're going to
Well,
be
it's history. It's history,
Yeah.
just like with Al Capone. It's
Correct.
history. It's Italian cultural history with the organized crime.
Right. And you were in there along with Anthony Ruggiano, another friend of
Mhm.
the show, and
Mhm.
you came under fire by
Mhm.
some people. And we'll get into that as the story progresses. But I myself, at least at that time, I had seen your documentary. I think it was on CBS a long time ago,
Mhm.
but I hadn't really seen you since then. So when you popped up, of course, like everybody else, I go to Google, I start researching, and I remember seeing that thing from a long time ago.
But I had recently, I did Gotti and Son on A&E
Right.
about John Gotti Jr. did that. So I was in that also.
Mhm.
And then I was also in Mafia Killers on Rails. I was in every episode of
Yep.
that. I was in Gangster Chronicles. I was in many, many documentaries
Mhm.
for related organized crime. And so, yeah, a lot of stuff through the years. And I think you're going back to when my book was released in 2004.
Yep.
I did 60 Minutes. And 60
Yep.
Minutes, just to put that out there, they're one of the most reputable news teams in our country.
Right.
Okay. They really vet you.
Oh, yeah.
They really vet you. They go back, they vet you, they talk to prosecutors, they talk to the attorneys, they talk to everybody because they're not going to put you on and you're a fraud.
Right. And that's one of the things that I think people don't really get. And I've experienced a little bit myself with situations that I've had, how I was portrayed in the media, how papers wrote things, how news stations write things. They're going to paint you however they want.
Correct.
Same thing with Netflix, even though I'm sure you were glad to be a part of that show. It was a wonderful presentation. They had you listed as an associate. And the way you were talking, I'm just willing to bet. I don't know. You and I have never talked until right now.
Right.
I'm willing to bet, like when you were saying, we were talking about murders, you were probably talking about people outside of the context of how it made it seem on that show.
Well, the murders, I was actually talking about the murders in my particular case.
Right.
In my case, there were a lot of murders. And then when I was talking about, which a lot of these other YouTubers ran with, when I said we were in the streets, meaning not with John Gotti, we back in that time era were in the streets making a lot of money, which was a fact. I was arrested for it.
Right. And that's what I kind of pieced together. And I'm not defending people that bashed you. They should have done, the research, but it does make it seem the way they pieced it and seamed it together that you're saying you were sitting with them, even though they didn't come out of your mouth. The way they seemed and edited it together, it makes it seem that way, which is what they do a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
so,
I mean, but it could have been also, I think the whole thing started, the whole thing started with Michael. So he could have called me He could have very well just called me up and I would have told him, here, would you research this, research that? Yes. Call Bruce Cutler. Yeah. You could call the prosecutor. Yeah. Did I know Gotti? Sure. But you're not going to go to people in the streets that really know me, like Danny Marino, like Ali Shades, because these people didn't cooperate.
Right.
So he can't go to those people. Who are you going to?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's another thing too. I think they classified you in there as like an associate, and I don't even know if Netflix is 100% clear on what associate means. I mean, associate could be a lot of
things. Exactly. Associate in regular language terms can mean you and I are associates. We're just starting to talk.
Right.
My driver could be my associate. I'm talking to him while he's driving me, for instance. My cleaning lady, associate has a big range if you Google associate, but I understand what they were saying. Associate in Italian culture of organized crime means there's a level of you were like right there involved.
If
so
anybody's seen those,
I do understand that.
Yeah, if anybody's ever seen those charts, it usually has like one guy at the top, like boss and underboss, consigliere, capos, on down the line until you get to associates.
Right.
And again, that's the editing and the way they put things together at Netflix. And I understand why they do it. This is what they wanted. They wanted controversy.
What I could say this way is that, yes, in the small little genre of this, what we're doing, but around the world,
it's different.
It's different. We were a big deal. Me and Anthony blown up, which we have a lot of Anthony and I are working together on another major project, So I don't want to get into it now, but they loved us around the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and like I said, you and I have just gotten a chance to talk. We've talked a little through email, but I've done a lot of stuff with Anthony, and regardless of what he may or may not have done throughout his time when he was at organized crime, I can't judge anyone for that. That was their choice. He spent a lot of time in prison, a lot of time away from his kids. I can only judge him on the man he is now and the man he's been to me since we've, been doing things off and on with projects and such. And to me, he's been a gentleman. So
Anthony is one of the people that he's changed. He's, redemption. And
reform gangsters.
Yes, he really is. And I really like Anthony a lot. And, I think that coming from that background, you go through so much. Like, he went through his heartache of being born into it with his father and being pushed to do things that really eat you up, the way I had my mother pushing me on the other level for things of that, for poverty reasons, you know what I mean? And no education, coming from the background we came from, the same area. So, you just get involved and then it just spirals out of control.
And that's kind of what I wanted to get into today. Obviously covered that, and we'll touch more on it there, but kind of get your backstory. And before we get into it, I'll say this one more thing. I think it's not just towards you. People love to hate on anybody that's involved in a good thing. I even heard somebody say one time, well, Ruggiano was never around Gotti. And I'm like, his dad was Fat Andy.
Yeah.
Well, they say that for a minute that he wasn't around him. Like, really?
But they say that about me too. They say, oh, she never knew him and da 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 da. Okay. So, they say that also about me.
So let's step it back here just for a minute. Tell us a little bit. Your mom, and you've mentioned been around organized crime for a while. From what I understand, your mom used to run card games for Joe Gallo.
For Joe Gallo, yeah, for Crazy Joe Gallo.
And so what area was this?
In Brooklyn, it was like Prospect, Kings County area, right around where Anthony comes from. Also, same area. East 2nd Street between Ditmas and Avenue F, Kings County. I don't really remember what they called it, the county there, but I believe it was Kings County. So that was my first impression of those types of men, at a very young age. And I guess coming from that and not having an education, I come from a family of 10 children. I'm one of 10, number 6 down. So we were pretty poor. I think that we always you always want like a better life, because when you grow up so poor and you see the other kids that have nicer things, and
Right.
I think even when I was pulled out of school in the 7th grade, because I only have a 7th grade education, I kind of liked being pulled out of school in a sense, because I was ashamed. I wore a lot of shame because of not having the clothes and having hand-me-downs, or they were shabby or ripped. So I think that with that, I kind of was glad about that in a sense. Like, you know what? I don't want to go to school. Who
Right.
wants to go to school? But then again, a lot of kids in the neighborhood didn't go to school. That's why a lot of these guys are street guys, because they didn't have an education. So they strive to go do criminal things to support their families or have nicer things.
And two of your brothers would also grow up to become mafia members also, right? I think one was Colombo and one was Lucchese.
They really, I'll be honest with you, they had connections, but they didn't want to be under anybody, like
Right.
in that mafia thing, because they did their own thing.
So freelancers. And sometimes that was best for the
Yes,
mob. And that's another thing. Like when you see like mafia didn't want anything to do with drugs. Certain guys that may be true, but they might have guys over here that had everything to do with drugs and
100%.
they would get an envelope from them.
Well,
So
that's the same thing that happened with the Gambino crime family when John Gotti took over. I met John Gotti through Mark Reiter. Mark Reiter was the major heroin trafficker,
right.
which they label him as the king of New York,
Mhm.
and they're looking to develop a series or a film about him because his story is so unique, and he's not just your regular street guy, tough guy. He has a big background story, and I talk to him regularly. Um, I visited him quite a few times this year up in Allenwood Federal Prison.
Yeah, and
So
we'll get into him too because he's got I think I had heard that name before, but I really didn't understand the scope of who he was until I was listening to you kind of describe it. But he wasn't your first husband, though. You were married to a
he
is
was
it Toby Perfetti?
he was not my husband. Mark Ryder was
Oh,
never my husband.
yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
No. My first husband was Toby Perfetto, and he was a street guy. He was like, the father was connected and all that. He was in and out of prison, but the marriage only lasted a year. I was a young kid. I was a teenage marriage. My second marriage was a very legal businessman. That didn't work out because he was a very successful businessman. I tried to go that way, but he was extremely abusive.
Mhm.
And then my third was John Fogarty, which was a very tough Irish connected, that way. And then I have two children from him, from John Fogarty, which is my younger son and my younger daughter. But I think that with that, like, to get to those men, I did not know any better. So I was comfortable with them, because when I tried to go with the legal businessman, it was more uncomfortable for me because I didn't know the language, how to speak, how to act when we went to parties, or I didn't know anything about like art or education or politics. So I would be more or less shelled in the background because my self-esteem was just so broken.
Right.
And I think then after that, that's when I lured back to street guys, and then I met Mark Ryder. Before I met John Fogarty, I was with Mark Ryder. And when I met Mark Ryder and I was hanging out in the clubs with him and John Gotti, the club called Regine's, club called Club A, and prancing around Manhattan, people always ask me, that's why they wanted me on the Netflix show, because they wanted a perspective of John Gotti in a sense of what was he like other than his family, because they
Right.
didn't have anybody's family. What was he like away from being so angry and the most treacherous mob boss out there? So, because they asked me, were you afraid of him? Absolutely not. He was a perfect gentleman. I mean, he really was.
Right.
Wait, if I tell you today that the era I came from of those mob guys, and I will name a lot of them, they didn't act like the people today. They had, believe me, a lot of respect. Like I always say the same thing about John. I cursed. I was a wild kid. I fought with him there. He pulled me off the girl. He named me Rocky. He would say, don't curse. There's a lady sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how John was. So I knew John out a different way in a setting of having fun. There's music, dancing, Cristal on the table, champagne. It wasn't like anything of negativity. It was more fun, a fun time.
Right.
So, I didn't see him in the other light. Of course, I knew what he was capable of. Of course, I know, but
yeah,
I always liked John. He was respectful. A lot of those guys were. I don't know any guy in that era that ever acted like the guys today. I don't. I really don't.
I hear that a lot from some of the older people that I've the older generation. And I think like that would be what I would refer to as like the golden era of the mob. There was
Absolutely.
loyalty was still a thing. Respect was still a thing. I mean, obviously you had some guys turn here and there, going back to like Joe Gallo, but obviously I think when Sammy did it, way back when Sammy did it, it really opened the door for everyone. And then
he opened up the gates. I always say he opened up the gates.
He made it. I almost want to say normal. Like nowadays it is normal. It's not something that is taboo like it was years ago.
I had on my attorney the last episode I did that I put out last week. I don't know if you've seen it. And
I did with you and your attorney and your son.
My son, yes. Yeah. I have 3 sons, and all my sons are boxers and MMA. So that's what they do. And he said it, the attorney, he's one of the top-notch attorneys here in Philadelphia. He said that it's like normalized.
Yeah.
It's normalized. We're back in the era where I came from. That wasn't like you would be killed.
Right.
So when I was relocated to Pennsylvania, when the feds came to me, when I was arrested and they relocated me and I didn't have to cooperate, it didn't matter. There was still a contract out on my life. And that's what I was trying to put out, that back then people need to understand this, is that when these, and I don't want to bash anybody because I don't like to talk bad about any, but let's say I'm going to say these big YouTubers, big platforms, and they dance around the question of cooperation. Well, I didn't put anybody in jail. Follow what I'm saying and you'll know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't put anybody in jail. Back then, you should know that the minute you go in and talk to them, you're a dead man. You're a dead man. The minute you go in and talk to feds, you're no good in the streets. Mm-hmm. You would have had a target on your back, and that was so unheard of back then. And be honest, say, you say everything else that you want to say, but say that you would be killed. It wasn't when these men take an oath, Wade. Now follow what I'm going to tell you. They take an oath to omerta, meaning never speak. And that doesn't matter if someone goes and cooperates or someone gets killed. You never open your mouth. That's the oath you take.
Yeah.
So when they try to justify why they cooperated, it doesn't really fit the criteria of what the oath you took. Right. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I follow what you're saying. And that, I think that happens a lot. And it's like, I'll give Sammy this. When he come in and he went on YouTube, obviously you cannot hide what he did and the impact that, it had on La Cosa Nostra. Mm-hmm. So he embraced it and he went with the stories that nobody else was going to be able to tell because, like Sammy or not, he's got stories that a lot of people don't have. Some people, because he's the last one standing, because he killed him. He took him out. So, he's going to have some stories, and he knew that would be a thing that people would, like to hear and get into those things. That's not to say that I think people are condoning his actions. It's just like a movie. People get into movies, they get invested in the characters. And
they like entertainment.
Yeah, they like entertainment. And that's kind of where the my show fits.
And he's a good storyteller.
He is. He's very good at it. And,
He's a
and
good
there's a lot of
storyteller.
other people that are good at it as well. I do want to talk for a minute. One of the people that you hooked up with for a little bit was a man named Franky Lino.
Yeah, not for a little bit. I lived with him for about 2.5 years. Yeah, I was living with him.
How did you meet Frank?
I met Frank. I was working I was modeling in Manhattan for extra money for Calvin Klein, and I did a couple fashion shows, like runway shows, and then I was working at as a hostess at a restaurant. And the friend of mine, the restaurant was connected through street guys, which I knew, and he said, "We're opening up this club on Avenue U in Brooklyn," which was in my area. And I was a single mom at the time. I was 22. Do you want to work? He said, "I can give you Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And those are the really good nights. You can make really good money instead of doing this, traveling back and forth to Manhattan." I said, "Sure, I'll do it." So I didn't know it was Franky Lino's club. I had no idea who Franky Lino was. Mm-hmm. I was 22 when I met him. He was about 44. Because he was like 22 years older than me. So I met Franky Lino working in his club. And then
and what were you doing there? Were you just...
as the club is a gambling club. Okay. So what we do, we serve the drinks and give them food, like if they want food, or, bring over.
Was this like an after hour spot?
Yeah, it would open around 9-10 o'clock. Like that, and close around 4, I'd say. Not as much after hours as much gambling.
Okay, but still an illegal run?
Oh, yes, definitely illegal. You couldn't get in the you couldn't get in the club unless you knew somebody, because there were like, bouncers and stuff like that. You ring the bell, they have to see who you are, who do you know? Yes, it was illegal. Okay.
So big spenders in there probably, and they're doing the gambling, yeah.
Big spenders, definitely big spenders. So Franky would come in and always leave me like $100 tip. So $100 tip back then is a lot of money, as a single mom. And then he asked me to go out, and I did, and that's how I met him. We went out to dinner, and he was very nice. I told me he didn't want me working there no more. He got me fired. I didn't know why. So basically that was it. But yeah, I learned a lot from Franky because I was living with him, with my child, and
he was a tough customer. Like I've read a lot of stuff on him.
And then also people say she was a side piece to him. I was living with him. I mean, please stop.
Side pieces generally don't live in the same house.
They don't live in the same house. And I wasn't somebody's girlfriend. Like they say, like first of all, I've never would go out with somebody's husband, because I'm a very smart street person. I'm the kind of woman that always knew, if you're cheating on your wife, you're going to cheat on me, buddy. So I would never do that. I was very attractive when I was young, and I wouldn't need to do that. So.
And we've only been talking for 22 minutes here, but I can kind of pick up and tell that I don't think you would be the type of lady that would even settle for 20% of somebody's time. You're going to need the whole
Never going to happen. Never going to happen. Never. So.
Now, how much did you know about what Franky was into? Like, did you know a lot about his business? Or?
Of course, I learned as I was going, because Franky had a place in Florida in Pompano Beach. And Franky also had a place in Hunter Mountain where we would go skiing. So Franky at the time was which I believe Anthony and Delgado, Bruno, he was Franky's boss.
Sonny Red, right?
Sonny Red's son. Sonny Red's son. Right. So Bruno was always around. The picture that is out there is Franky and I at Bruno's wedding when he married his wife, Marianne.
Okay.
And so I was with him at the wedding. And then Joey D'Amico, and then Donnie Shacks. These were all old timers. Jerry Lang, old timers, old time street guys. So I had been in the company many, many times of Tommy Patera, Tommy Karate, because he would come to Franky's house. So what did I see? When I was in Florida, at the Pompano house, we'd go down there for like a month or so at a time, say like now, March, April, go down and stay in Pompano. Bruno and all of them would be down there because they would have a place right across the street, like another house. So they would always come over, but it just got so out of hand. where I had a small child. He was like 4 or 5 at the time, and there was always a lot of cocaine around, a lot of cocaine, a lot of talking of a lot of violence. And that's basically why after the 2.5 years I left him. I couldn't deal with it anymore with a small child. And I'm not someone, everybody that knows me, I've never gotten drunk in my life. I don't drink and I never took drugs. I just never did. I never did that. I never drank and I never took drugs. So it was very like, I didn't want to be around that. I didn't want to be around drugs and drinking.
Now, would you say you love Franky?
Did I love Franky? I'm not going to say that because I think I was so young. I was 22, and I think I was so impressed by him. I want to say
enamored by the lifestyle more.
Yeah, I was enamored with him, an older man.
Right.
And really, if you look at it now, 40s isn't old. But when you're 20, when you're 22, it's older, but it's not old by no means.
Right.
So I was enamored by him, and I learned a lot from him. He treated me very well, very well. We had a driver, and the driver would take me out into Manhattan and take me shopping. And when people say like Sammy, and I'll quote this because Sammy said it, Franky Lino had short pockets. He didn't, spend. Well, he spent on me. He did spend on me. And he did buy a 450 SL Mercedes, and I drove it. That was my car. He said, "This is for you to drive." And I always had that car around Brooklyn. That was my car. When I left the relationship, did I take it? No, but that was the car that I used. But how did they know what my relationship was with him? He was very generous, not just to me, but to my family. He was very good to my family also. So I've never had anything bad to say about him. And all his children, they were always around. They be at the house. His daughter Debbie lived with us. The kids would always come over. He had a very good relationship with his ex-wife. I liked his ex-wife. So I was very involved with him for quite a few years.
Well, a lot of people want to combat, when you say like, these guys have morals and they've done right. When you're talking about certain instances, it feels like, when it comes to women, a lot of these guys treated women with respect and things like that. But at the same time, they were capable of ordering murders or, having things done. So it's kind of hard to say, oh, this guy had good morals when they were capable of the same things. But if you take the criminal aspect away, I think the morals that you would want any kid to have today were intact. And that goes to John Frank. A lot of them, people that I've heard that had conversations with him said he was very respectful. Now, as far as business side, that's different. That's something else. That's something I can't speak on.
He always treated me very well. I have nothing bad to say about that man, Franky Lino. He was always very, very good to me.
There was a situation, I think, to where he supplied a car to a robbery. I think some cops got shot. He was arrested and he was beaten pretty bad, I think, to where he actually sustained like permanent damage after that. You know anything about that?
I don't. I mean, also, you got to remember, Eddie Lino was his first cousin.
Mm-hmm.
So I was around Eddie Lino a lot also.
Mm-hmm.
So I had been around, so now, I'm 22 at this time. I had been around street guys my whole life.
Right.
People, all those guys knew me very well. Even now, people in the streets that aren't cooperated, government informers know me. So when the YouTubers say nobody ever heard of her, that's bull. That is bull. In one breath you say, "Oh, Michael, I've watched he says, I've watched all these documentaries I never heard of. I've been in all of them."
Mm-hmm. And wasn't he also, and I'm talking about Franky here, wasn't he also suspected to be involved in the murder that was kind of portrayed in the movie Donnie Brasco, where Al Indelicado, Dominic Trinchera, and I think it was Philip Jacone got killed?
I believe so. Like so I said,
these aren't guys that people have never heard of that were not involved in the life.
Come on, really?
That's kind of why I brought that up, was to just put in perspective of the level of guys we're dealing with. You're not going to have somebody that's a barely involved individual involved in a hit of that magnitude.
And how do you know these younger guys today that are 38 or 40? How do you know you were a baby when I was with Franky Lino. How do you know what my relationship was with him or
Right.
what was going on? You were in your diapers, just like my son said.
Yeah.
You know, you were in diapers. Where do you come off even commenting about stuff like that? You have no idea.
Yeah. And again, too, when I say these things, I'm going off what I researched, because at the same token, I wasn't around either, but I do try to do as much research as I can. And even that's hard sometimes with as many outlets that's out there. You don't necessarily know what you're reading is fact. And it was also alleged that in Donnie Brasco, you never seen Sonny Black get killed. It's portrayed it that Lefty, who was played by Al Pacino, was
Right.
being called upon, and he left his stuff knowing that he was probably going to go and get killed. And in actuality, Lefty wound up going to prison. Sonny Black was the one. Sonny Black
Right.
Napolitano got killed. It's alleged that Frankie was the one that called him to
Right.
me.
Right. And I think that, not that I think, I know back then, these guys were hardcore killers.
Right.
They have to go out and do a piece of work. They're going to do it. These guys do not inform. They don't cooperate. I mean, Frankie later in life did after Sammy opened up the gates of heaven, for everybody to cooperate. But they, back in the era where I hung out with them in like the 80s, nobody did that. You didn't even hear about that. It was unheard of.
Right. So when you kind of got away from Frankie, what was kind of your next, step? Where were you going after that?
Oh, so when I left Frankie in the 80s, later 80s, I met my second husband, Carmine, and he was a legitimate, very wealthy businessman. And that's when I got married to him and had a child with him. And then that didn't work out. He was extremely abusive. And then after that divorce, that's when I went back out in the clubs, and that's when I met Mark Reiter and John Gotti and all of them. And I fell right back into where I was comfortable, in my comfort zone.
Isn't that crazy that is comfort? Because that's what you grew up around. That's what you knew.
What I was so comfortable with them. So when people always say, I don't never date. I haven't dated in 10 years. I have no desire to date. I have such a full life with my grandkids and my adult kids. But when people always would say to me, oh, why don't you date? I can't date. You know why? Because if a guy says to me, and when I did try to date, and they go, and they know a little bit about my background, because, I've done book tours and stuff like that. And, I'm always out in doing something in pertaining to this. Are you afraid? The minute they say that to me, done. I'll never go out with you again. Done. That's it.
PSA announcement if you're trying to slide it to the DM.
Because then you're asking me, am I afraid? That means to me, because I'm, rough around the edges.
You're afraid.
You're afraid. So why do I want to go with you when you're supposed to be protecting me? So no, I don't date.
When you started hanging out with them, who did you meet first? Did you meet John first, or?
I met John Gotti the first night that I met Mark Reiter. So
okay, so you met them together.
I met them all together. They were all out. Bobby Borriello, all of them were out. Anthony Rapino was there. There was a whole bunch of them. And then, as I went out with Mark, and then we're out on a regular basis, we're all out together all the time. We're all sitting there, we're all out. And then even when I wasn't with Mark, out with him, or he's doing stuff, and I went out to the club, he knew I was with all of them.
Right.
I was hanging out with his friends.
Yeah.
Because he'd say, what do you do? I said, well, you got stuff to do, then I'll go out with my girlfriends and we'll hang out with them, which was fine. Because they all watch over you.
Explain a little bit to the listeners, like kind of who Mark was, his connections, and just kind of what his, I guess, the take on him was. I've heard you say in past interviews, they classified him as like the king of New York. I think he even bought a house that was formerly Calvin Klein's in New York. Is that right?
Yes. High-rise apartment. Absolutely gorgeous. Yes. His apartment was beautiful, bought from Calvin Klein. He was considered the king of New York because he was the major trafficker for heroin. I think they were bringing in $250,000 a week from heroin back then. I recently asked Mark Reiter the question when I visited him, but let me tell the audience who he is, and then we'll tell you what I asked him. So Mark was very close to John Gotti. He met John Gotti through Sal Ruggiero, which is Angelo Ruggiero's brother.
Right.
Sal Okay. So they were all very young in the neighborhood, maybe like 19, 20, whatever. And he met John then, before John was a boss and all of that. These guys were all very close. And Mark was very good friends with Johnny Caniglia,
Mm-hmm.
like best friends with him. So Mark is a big guy. He's like 6'3", worked out, very tough, very, very tough. And he got involved with doing all of this with the major heroin and being close to John Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero. And that brought in a lot of money to the Gambino crime family. So John liked him a lot because he did a lot of pieces of work for John. And I don't want to get into that because he's going to, that's his own story. You know
Right.
what I mean? But he did a lot of stuff with other guys, with John and all of that. And he was very well respected by John and by all the guys. So when the indictments came down, and he had already did it like a 6-year bid, and then he knew from his lawyer that like I was with him one night, and then we went to go meet his lawyer, which was Barry Slotnick. We met him in Manhattan at a place that wasn't in his apartment, like because they didn't know for wiretaps and all. The lawyer had told him indictments are coming down and it doesn't look good. And I think that's when he tried to get rid of a lot of his money with different people. So he knew they were going to come, because when they come, they take everything.
Right. They seize it.
Right. They seize everything. So then I was holding $300,000 for him back then, which was a lot of money. And then John found out about it, John Gotti. And then John had asked me, he had Anthony Rapino come over to me when we were out in a club. And he said that John wants to talk to you, because I was sitting with some friends instead of, I was with some girlfriends. We were out. He said, John said, could you come over to the table? He wants to talk to you. And then when I went over, he said, I heard something. Are you holding money for Mark? And I said, yeah, I am. He goes, do you know how much it is? I said, I really don't know how much it is, because I really never really went into the box. I knew it wasn't drugs, because he knew he wouldn't put that on me. I would never take drugs in my house. And I knew it wasn't heavy enough to be guns. So I knew it had to be money, but I really never looked. Then I had asked him, and he said, yeah, it was money. But anyway, so John had asked me, and then he was like, all right, Ann, I'll straighten it with him. And then, so John knew enough to know I wasn't going to go say that. You know what I mean? Like, I knew the street language, because he knew I was with Frank Lino. He knew my mother was running the card games for Crazy Joe Gallo back in the day. So he knew I knew the format of you don't speak. So when Mark knew these indictments were coming down and he got arrested and all of that, he didn't show up for court one day. Not anybody sent him, because I just recently heard people saying, oh, I sent him out to California and we sent him there. He called me the other night and I was asking, he says, Andrea, go back and think. Nobody knew when I took that flight. They didn't send me anywhere. Nobody knew. Nobody knew where I was going, running on the lam. Nobody knew where I was going. He goes, did they pay my flight too? There's a lot of lies that are being made up.
Right.
A lot of lies. So recently, when I visited him, I asked him, I said, Mark, I want to know, what were you thinking, like major trafficking, and you already did 6 years, and did you think you would never get in court? And what did you think about the heroin? People die from heroin. I mean, I have like 3 or 4 people, family, that died on heroin these past 5 years, I'd say. So, like, what were you thinking? And you know what his answer was? I wasn't thinking. What I'm thinking is the money. Yeah. That's what you're thinking. You get blinded by the greed.
Yeah, I think when you're making $250,000 a week, when it boils down to who it's affecting at a street level, it becomes very difficult to see.
It's very difficult to see, because you get blinded by that. You get blinded by the greed. You get blinded by, it's not going to happen to me. They're not going to da, 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 da. So, he's there 35 years. I mean, we're waiting to hear with the new laws that came out, because
all all of his co-defendants are released, right?
They're all released. They're all released. So it could be a matter of time. He'll be released. He's got a good shot because he's in Allenwood Low,
Right.
federal prison, Allenwood Low, which is up here in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And he wouldn't be in a low if he wasn't going to.
Right. Soon be out. It's just they'll kind of declassify you from the prisons the closer you get to
Yeah.
be released.
So we're just hoping, and I really hope for him. I pray for him all the time that he can get out and, be with his family, be with his son.
How long has he been in for?
35 years.
35.
And be able to see his grandkids and,
Right.
be there. But he was not somebody, and I heard this too, and I want to set the record straight. Sammy said that Mark would have cooperated, but no, he never did because there was a threat on his daughter. His daughter was 6 years old. No, there wasn't. Because I asked Mark that, and Mark said, never. There are men that would never. He goes, what do you think? I didn't have an opportunity through the years. They knew I knew so much. I would never. That's just, there are men that just don't do that. They just don't have it in. Like if you watch my show, my good friend George Martorano, he did 32 years.
Yeah, I've seen that episode.
He just doesn't. I have somebody coming on this weekend. I'll be filming in New York at my studio. This guy did 17 years. There's a lot. I'm having a lot of those types of guys on my show. And how I'm getting them is through Mark Reiter.
Right.
Mark Reiter sends, they're getting out, their friends of his, and then he sends them to me, and then they'll come on my podcast. Right. So that's how I'm finding a lot of these people through him that have never, ever cooperated because they don't have it in them.
Right. And those, and we talked about this earlier, it's becoming harder and harder to find people that would do that. And, again, I think a lot of people on the sidelines say, well, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. That's like the saying as old as dirt,
right.
But at the same time, there's just not a lot of people that can do the time. I mean, I know guys today that would rat out their own mother to get out of a seatbelt ticket. I mean, it's become commonplace.
It's common. And I think that's when people say, about me, what are you saying? Oh, she was a rat and all. I wanted to set the record straight. No, I never had to rat because my husband, I say it over and over, but if I had to, I would have. I just didn't have to.
And I'm going to get into that here too, because that definitely is a point that, we need to be cleared up. One thing before we get off of Mark, can you speak to who his connections may have been for the heroin?
Well, his connections, I know he originally started out through Sal Ruggiero. I don't know how Sal was getting it. And then he became so big, but then Nicky Barnes flipped on Mark. So Nicky Barnes was Mark was supplying all Harlem and the Bronx and all so they flipped on him. And I'm not quite sure where it was actually coming from, but I will, when I visit him, ask him.
I'm sure, because I've researched a lot in that area with Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes. There's also a lady, and I'm making, hook you two up. She never had to go to prison, but she was in the streets. She sold heroin, and she sold it with a lot of the big guys. If you've ever seen a movie Paid in Full,
I didn't.
It's a good movie. I don't need to tell you this. I wouldn't watch it too much.
New York?
Yeah, she's from Harlem.
So maybe she'll come on the show.
Yeah, I'm sure she would. She goes by Miss T, and she was in the streets and she done her thing. And there was guys by the name of like Rich Porter. He was a huge dealer. Faison, Alpo Martinez. I mean, a lot of names.
There was also another guy that flipped on Mark Jackson. I think it was James Jackson.
Okay.
He was a big heroin dealer along with Nicky Barnes, and they all cooperated on the case.
So there's no telling who you guys might, know that, had associates with one another. And I can give you her info. She's right there in Harlem. So I'm sure she would love to come on. We had a fantastic interview. She's got a lot of great stories. But I always find that interesting of like who the connect was, because if anybody's seen that, like Nicky, once he went to prison, he ratted on everybody. What did she cooperate? No, she never done time.
Okay.
when she wrote her book, she did write an autobiography. She changed a few of the names, but by the time she wrote it, a lot of the people that she had dealt with were either already in prison doing life, so it's not
Right.
like it was going to hurt them,
Right.
or they were already deceased.
Right.
She had to deal with some blowback about, some of the facts that she spit from the families of the
Okay.
deceased, but nobody got jammed up or nobody got arrested for that because she got out of the life. She moved to Atlanta for a while. Then she came back to Harlem and she just wrote a book about her life and who she dealt with and who she had experiences with.
Yeah.
So she never was put
And
in a position.
that's basically why I decided to start my channel, my YouTube channel, was to keep it positive and more or less tell my story.
Right.
Tell my story and other people's stories, and a lot of people that didn't cooperate. That's who I'm bringing on my show. But yet, all these backlash about, it's just crazy.
Yeah. The next guy you met, John Fogarty.
Fogarty. Yeah.
How did you meet him?
Again, I met him in Manhattan through another friend, another street guy.
And he was a pretty prolific smuggler too, as well, or dope runner.
Cocaine.
There was a issue, I think, where, and I forgot where I heard this because I've listened to a lot of stuff in prep for this interview, but basically he came home late for dinner, and I don't know if he informed you or you asked that there was 2 bodies of 2 Brazilian guys in the trunk of the car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a true story.
So was this commonplace? Was that normal?
And what's really crazy, that the red pickup truck, and it had like the back is covered. What do you call it? The cap.
Yeah, the tonneau cover or whatever. Yeah,
the cap. Cover. Right. And it was him and another street guy, Johnny Mancelli. But Johnny Mancelli unfortunately passed away. Had 2 bodies in the back of the car, and he stopped home. I forgot what to get something, and I'm like, but the whole thing is the frigging truck was in my name.
Oh boy.
So yeah, but then again, and I look back now, that was like normal.
Yeah, that was commonplace, and that's
because back then murder was like, yeah, you do something, you're gonna get whacked. You do something, you're gonna get, put to sleep. You do something that it could be anything. Like they were killing them like you kill a cockroach. Back in that era.
And I don't know if it was those particular guys, but from what I understand, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you would know better than me. It was a deal. He decided to kill those 2 guys, but he did get some blowback. He got some heat for killing those 2 guys. Is that right? Or is that another situation?
No, he never got heat. Let me tell you about him. He was never connected to no, like, really strong organized crime.
Right.
He was, how could I explain him? A madman, like not afraid of anybody.
Right.
Not afraid of anybody. You say one wrong thing to him and you're not waking up the next day. He'll stalk you. He'll come to your house and he will do it. Then he teams up with my brother, which was called Johnny Bubblegum, 17 years old, did his first murder. 2 psychos together. So, I can tell you this, and he's not my husband, anymore, and he hasn't been, but he feared no one. Right. No one.
He dealt with the bluegrass mafia as well.
I don't know what that is.
That's like the people out of Kentucky. They call them the bluegrass mafia, but it's the mob out of Kentucky. They run a lot of drugs.
I just know that he got caught in Tennessee with 100 pounds of marijuana. So maybe I don't know that.
Yeah, Kentucky, Tennessee. Did you ever see that movie, The Cocaine Bear, that recently come out about a year ago?
I didn't, because it looks stupid. Is it stupid? It looked like a bear that took cocaine, and I'm like, I can't watch this.
It's entertaining.
Okay.
It is entertaining. But did you know that is actually based somewhat on a true story?
I didn't know, but I'll watch it.
So there was a guy that was a prolific dope smuggler. His name was David Howard Thornton.
Okay.
And he was running drugs for the Colombians. And his plan was he was flying a load back. He would throw a couple duffel bags out somewhere in that park around the Tennessee area. And then he was going to jump out with some strapped to him and let the plane crash. Then
Okay.
he's going to tell the Colombians, hey, I was being tailed. I jumped out. I saved this. This is what I got. That's all I could do for you. And then later on, go back and find the bags that he dumped out in the park.
Okay.
Well, he miscalculated what he kept on him, and his parachute basically was ineffective, and he plummeled straight to the ground and landed in somebody's driveway. The
Okay.
bags that landed in the park, one of them was found by a bear. The bear did eat it,
Uh,
but he immediately died of a massive heart attack.
the
Go figure.
bear.
Yeah, the
Oh,
bear.
of course.
Uh,
Yeah. So no, Fogarty, he wouldn't be taking orders from any man. Not
right.
he didn't care what kind of boss you are. He's not that kind of guy to take an order from anybody.
Now, when you got arrested, were you with him?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
How deep were you
I
involved?
had two small children with him. My kids were little at the time.
So you would consider yourself a pretty major player in the middle of his drug operation at this point.
100%. I was arrested on a RICO. You know what a RICO is. I was
Oh, yeah.
arrested with men.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, no, she just got arrested, da, 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 da,
You're arrested with 22 other guys, right?
Exactly.
Now, they had your house bugged or your phone bugged?
My phone. Yes. They heard me giving instructions. And that's another thing. People go, she gave instructions. Well, these men on YouTube, not YouTubers, these fans that don't understand that. Well, maybe because they don't have the balls to be the person that how we were raised or where I came from, or what I've been through. Yes, that's what I gave instructions. That's what I got arrested for. That's documented. You
gave your brother the instructions, right? There was a guy that couldn't repay like a $20,000 loan or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't just my brother. It was 4 other guys that I said to go get them, go up there and go get my effing money, And I said, it was very graphic because the judge in the courtroom said, I heard what orders you gave, Miss Giovino. But then like these young YouTubers go, no, she never did that. Okay. Am I proud of it? No, I'm not proud of it, but that's all I knew. When you don't pay back then, there's a consequence.
Outside of him pulling up that day with the bodies in the back of the truck, I mean, what was some of the craziest experiences you had with John?
Oh, God. Oh, that was such a tumultuous relationship, geez, a good story. Okay. So we were living in Staten Island and I had an apartment. This is a good story. It rented downstairs to a young couple. I rented it. He didn't know. He was always out running in the streets or whatever. And the guy said he was a Christian guy. What did I know? I was pregnant. I had kids in the house. So long story short, a guy knocks on my door one day and he says, do you know what you got living down there? I said, yeah, young couple. He says, no. Can you go down there and look? I says, well, I don't go into their apartment. He pays the rent and everything. He says, but I really think, he told me he owned a store not far from where we lived. And he said, I really think, because I just fired him. I really think you need to know what you have living down there. I said, okay, I'll go down and look. I go down, long story short, he's a devil worshiper. He's got all this devil stuff. So I call up Fogarty. Listen, I call up my husband. I go, John, you don't know, there's a devil worshiper. No, we're Christian, we're Catholics. He comes, with a dumpster because he had backhoes. He goes in the apartment. He gets his friends. They get all the guy's stuff, furniture, everything. They throw it in the dumpster. The guy comes home. He grabs him. This is going around the street. He goes, you effing piece of shit. You want to be a devil worshiper? He grabs him by the neck. He goes like this, here, I'll make you meet the devil. And he beat the hell out of him. The cops come. And the cops go like this. Jesus, he's a devil worshiper. Okay, get him out of here. So that was a good story.
One of them where the criminals and the cops still have a good, sense of who the bad guy is.
Yeah, back then they knew because John said, I got my wife upstairs. We got kids, this piece of crap over here, with the devil. So then I will never forget. He grabbed him by the throat because Fogarty's a big guy, 6'2".
Mhm.
It's like my son. I don't know if you, my son's a all my sons are boxers, but my younger son, he's a big guy like the father, grabbed him by the throat, held him up, like lifted him up. He says, I'll make you meet the devil.
When you finally do get arrested, it's 22, as we said earlier, 22 on the indictment. It's a lot of people. What do they offer you? And this is a big, or what do they want you to do? Because this is a big point of contention with people that talk about you. And I've heard people say, "Oh, she cooperated."
No. Okay. So I'll tell you what they wanted. They come in the room, and this first thing they said to me was, you better tell the truth and you better cooperate, because you don't want to be the last person on the bus. You want to be the first person on the bus, because then we're not going to need you.
Right.
And I said, I want to talk to my lawyer. I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to my lawyer. My lawyer was associated in the same firm as Bruce Cutler, Bettina Shine.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't know anything. I know nothing. And then they said, you know a lot. We backtracked you. You were with Franky Lino. You were with Mark Reiter. You were a regular with John Gotti. Now, this is coming from feds. This is coming from DEA. We backtracked everything. You know a lot. You've been around these guys your whole life. I said, I don't want to talk. I want to talk to my lawyer. I want to talk to my lawyer. So when I was released, I talked to my lawyer. I never talked to them. My lawyer, we get out, bails me out. That's next day when I get released. That's when Fogarty was in Tennessee on that case of the 100 pounds of marijuana. I said to him, John, you better come forward and tell the truth. I said, because I'm facing 10 years, the lawyer said. I said, I was arrested on a RICO. I said, and I had nothing to do with the murders in this case. I know nothing about this, which I didn't. They didn't want me. I said, I'm home raising the kids, putting money on the street to try to pay the bills. I said, I don't, like, on the RICO, you're getting charged with what everybody else is getting charged with.
Right.
So he's like, you know,
so
what
just to clear this up, is he already in prison or he's out?
Yes. No, he was incarcerated. He was incarcerated.
So when you got arrested, he was already incarcerated.
He was already incarcerated on an 8-year bid. He was already in for about 2 years. He's not a person that would have cooperated. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
So he says, do you realize what you're asking me? I said, do you realize where I'm going and your kids are going to go to child services? Are you out of your effing mind? You know what you have to do here? This is your children we're talking about. They're babies. Nobody's taking them. Immediately, we jump on the phone. I said, you got to call this Ross Perlson. That was the prosecutor of the case. I said, you need to tell the truth. I told my brother John the same thing. I said, you've got to do something. I said, you're going to get life, because my brother was a 3-time felon.
Right.
He had been in and out of prison. And there were a lot of murders on this case. He was going away for life. And he was struggling with it too. These guys weren't guys that just were going to go cooperate. I'm telling you the truth, Wade. They weren't. And it was to get me off. So I never had to cooperate, because I really did not know a lot of the stuff that they knew. I really didn't. I only knew what I did, put money on the streets and gave instructions to go hurt somebody, because the guy didn't pay the money back. So they cooperated upon the release of me not being indicted.
Okay.
That's the facts.
And where people could get this misunderstood, I want to read something here. It was from, I think, a CNN piece that was done on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to read this here. It says, federal agents raided her house early one morning, told her she was facing 10 years in prison, and made her an offer she could not and did not refuse. And this is you talking here, was I afraid of prison? No. I knew I could survive in prison, but yes. I didn't want to leave those babies.
Correct.
Said, so I felt I'm going to use what I know. I'm very smart, and I'm going to tell the truth. Now, this is them here. It says, so Andrea played ball with the feds, and they got her and her kids out of New York in a hurry. She says threats were made on her life, which you kind of alluded to that earlier.
Yes.
Feds relocated her to a place in the country. She asked us not to reveal where, as she was in the process of writing her book about the mob years, possibly hoping to get this turned into a movie. So the way that reads,
yes,
and the way some of the other articles read, it reads that you cooperated.
Yeah, but I never had to.
Okay.
My husband and my brother did. So yes, what I say, I'm very smart. I was very smart to make them cooperate because they
Right.
wanted them and they didn't want me. And
Especially if your brother's like, and you hate to throw this around so lightly because it is life, but if your brother's going away for life, what is you would have to ask yourself, what is he losing by keeping you out of jail? You know what I'm
mhm,
saying? Like,
right,
by not talking, it's going to essentially jam you up for 10 years.
exactly.
Now John, on the other hand, probably got a lot more time than, he was facing with the 6 he had left, I would
Hmm.
imagine.
Yeah, because, well, also, even though John was doing 8 years on the marijuana case, in my case, he would have been reindicted
Mhm.
and expedited back for this new case where he was involved with murders.
Yeah.
So
And he
never
pled
would have,
this.
right. He would have never seen daylight either. He would have still been in.
Right.
So when his kids were up for, so so I could explain that, say about, yeah, I'm very smart and I did what I had to do. I did what I had to do and had them cooperate to release me from the case.
Okay.
But if I had to cooperate, I would have, but I
Okay.
didn't have to.
Well, you
I
can
didn't.
you can see where that confuses some people by
Yes,
reading that.
I can. But then you call me and you ask me, you know.
Exactly, which is what we're doing here. And that's,
You call me
you
and
know,
you ask me because I'm not a liar. I'll tell you the truth. And I told you that before we started. You could ask me anything. I'm an open book. I have no reason to.
and that's why, like, I always like to get it, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because again, that is a report that a reporter wrote.
Right.
And I've been the subject of, not necessarily in that particular, form, but I've been the subject of articles that were written and they weren't flattering and they were
No,
not the truth. And they did paint me in a light that wasn't 100%
exactly.
accurate.
But I
So
think it happens to everyone.
it does. It
It does.
does.
It happens to everyone. They put the negativity in it. And I don't judge anybody. I don't want to judge anybody because we live in a time frame right now that you don't have any friends, not in the
Right.
streets. There is no friends. There's no such word as a friend. If you're going to go out and do a piece of work or you're going to out and do a hit, you better go alone.
Yeah.
You better go alone
100%.
because it's just not going to work that way. And I'm the kind of person, like I said to you, I live here in Pennsylvania. We have the laws, the right to bear arms. I am a responsible licensed gun owner. And just like you, if I had to defend myself, I very well know how to use that, protect myself. And I would hope that would never happen like what's happened to you, because that's horrible.
Mhm.
But people do have the right to defend themselves, because in that situation, it was you or them.
Yeah.
And I
100%.
mean, let's face it, I'm going to pick you. You're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
pick yourself.
Every time.
Yeah. So I think with that, when you're a responsible licensed gun owner, and if I was indicted or anything, or I cooperated, I don't know if you know anything about the law, I would have never been able to get a gun.
Right. Yeah. They revoked mine whenever I got arrested. And then once everything was dropped, I was able to get it back reinstated. But had they not, and I would have pled to
Right.
something, which I'd have never done. But had I, accepted some sort of plea agreement to just ensure I didn't go to jail, I would have been unable to get that back.
But even if I did cooperate, and that's documented, I should cooperate, I would never be able to be a licensed gun owner.
Right. Yeah.
So there's
You lose that, right.
I would lose the right to that, right? But I am,
And
and
you didn't go to WITSEC either, though.
no, I did not. No, I did not. I didn't want to, because I would have lost custody of one of my children that was from a prior marriage.
That was what I was going to ask you about, because I wasn't sure if that was accurate. It said that if you go to WITSEC, I don't know if you were unable to, but I know if you did, I think they said you had joint custody of a
Yes.
kid from a previous marriage, so that's not
And
allowed.
he wouldn't have agreed to that. I would have lost custody of him. So what happened was the DEA and the FBI funded the money from their funds and relocated me. They used their funds, not the marshals. The marshals have a lot of money. And I didn't want to go into the marshals and change my name, change my social. My kids' names would have been changed. I wasn't doing that.
Right.
So they put their funding together, and then they paid for the relocation. And they put me in a very safe area, because I had small kids, where in my area where I lived at the time was a police sergeant lived across the street. Another cop lived next door. So I was surrounded by a lot of law enforcement to protect these children.
And what was that, Bucks or something? Where was that? Where they moved you to? Where they moved you? Was it Bucks or something like that?
It was Bucks County.
Bucks County. Okay.
Bucks County, a beautiful area. Very, very beautiful, beautiful area. Very good schools. That's why they chose that area, because the schools were very good.
And is that in Philly? Is that in New York? Where's that at?
It's a suburb right outside of Philly.
Okay. I've heard you talk on some interviews about how different it was, like when you went to go shopping and stuff like that. Listening to you talk about that, I kind of pictured the scene from, I don't know if you ever seen the movie My Blue Heaven.
Yes. Kind of. And so I say that I was like more of the Fran Drescher.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very hard for me back then. It was very, very, very hard. Very hard on me.
In one of the interviews, I don't remember which one it was, but they were kind of comparing you to like a version of Carmela Soprano to an extent. And you even said that you didn't watch The Sopranos very much at all. Have you still never watched that show?
I recently started watching them when my son comes home to visit, and we'll sit and watch them together because he's living out in LA. And then when he comes home, we'll put them on. And I laugh. I think they're hilarious.
I do too. And that is hands down my favorite TV show. I love it to death. I've had the chance to interview a lot of the people from that show. I probably interviewed like 7 people that's been in it. Recently, the last guy I interviewed was David Preval. And I don't know if you've gotten into season 2, but he played Richie Aprile.
Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, he was so good at that role. I mean, it was a really well done show. There's never been anything that even comes close to that.
Yeah, it was good. It's good.
But I can imagine coming from that lifestyle, it's hard because you're going to nitpick so hard more than an average viewer.
100%. Yeah. I think the thing I didn't like about The Sopranos is because the guys that I, been around and grew up with, and real street guys, they were definitely much more intelligent than the guys in Sopranos. They were definitely much more polished, and they didn't act like buffoons.
Right.
They really didn't. I mean, they always, even back in that time frame, it was a very glamorous kind of time frame where they all had beautiful $2,000 suits, $500 Ferragamo shoes, their labels on their cufflinks. Everything was meticulous. So it wasn't like today.
I always tell people the closest in that show, in my opinion, to like what I would believe a real gangster would be like was Johnny Sack. Like anytime you've seen him, he was always dressed to the nines, and he was a gangster.
All of them, even Jackie Nose, I knew very well. There's a story I'll tell you quick about Jackie Nose because I know he just passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, Jackie Nose D'Amico, right? It was the last
Jackie D'Amico, yeah. So Jackie, I was living on 85th Street and 20th Avenue in Brooklyn, and I had an apartment there. This is before Frank Lino. So that's what I'm saying. I've been around these guys my whole life. So Jackie was going out with a beautiful, beautiful friend of mine. She lived with me, my girlfriend, Sylvia, beautiful Cuban girl, gorgeous. So he had said he was coming into Brooklyn, and he asked me if he could use my phone, because he said, you can go out, and then if I could use your phone, because he probably wanted to do some illegal activity on the phone.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And then he gave me, now back then, $500 is a lot of money. Now the apartment was mine. And so he gave me $500. I'll never forget. And he said, go ahead, go across the street. There was a supermarket. He goes, go buy the food for the month, do whatever you want, go shopping. And again, a very nice gentleman.
Wow. Yeah. Did, the one that played Paulie Walnuts in the show, Tony Sirico, he was actually a member of the Columbos for a period of time.
Yes, I did know that. Yep. And then he got that part.
Yeah. But recently passed away. He passed away about a year ago, I think.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's just, now I'm just moving forward. I'm very busy with my family, with my kids, with my grandkids. I'm working on a project right now. So you'll be seeing us more. Anthony Reggiano's involved also.
And you did write a book you mentioned earlier. Tell us where they can find that book.
The book is, it's on Amazon, Divorce from the Mob by Andrea Giovino. And I also have my own podcast, on YouTube, Andrea Giovino, which is growing organically, which is doing good. I have some good guests.
It's hard to do it organically.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
least you've got a little bit of a benefit because coming off of the Get Gotti, a
Yes, I
lot of
did.
people probably are going to be YouTubing your name, and so it'll help
Yes.
you find the show. It's very for someone like myself who has no connections to anybody or a show for people to search. It's been hard
How
to
long have you started? When did you
about
start?
about little over 2.5 years ago.
Okay, and yeah, it's hard, but I mean, I got monetized within like 6 weeks.
I
So
can
that
believe
was
that.
that was good, so yeah, I had a jump start.
Yeah, it took me a little bit to get monetized, but it's steady growing. I'm finally to the point now because I've had some interviews with some controversial people, some good people. I've interviewed a lot of the guys that we've spoke about today, and it's getting to the point now where I can see numbers change each day,
Good.
which is a
Yeah,
good thing.
good.
And I'm closing in. I think I'm a little past 8,000 subscribers now,
That's
which is good
nice.
for a channel
Yeah.
like myself.
Yeah, that's great. Good. That's
What
good.
drove you to start your podcast?
What drove me to start my podcast, truthfully, a lot of friends I grew up with in the streets that never did cooperate told me get on there and get a podcast and start telling everybody the truth because these rats are telling all lies.
It sounds a little like what Joey's motto was when he started his podcast
Yeah.
in Philly. And I'm speaking of Joey Merlino. He's kind of going after a lot of the guys that
Yeah.
cooperated, and he's I like that show. I don't know if you know Joey, but I enjoy
Well,
that show.
Joey's very close with them. He's very close with a friend of mine, George Materano. They're very close. They're all from Philly, so they're very close. But I don't want to get into my show being bashing anybody. I just want to be bringing on people that did a lot of prison time and
Right.
never did cooperate. So that's basically, and then I want to gear more toward women's stories, like the woman that you'll hook me up with.
Yeah.
I'd like to, send me her information, email me. So, like more stuff like that. I'm not really looking to get into like they all fight back and forth.
Yeah. That stuff has a very small shelf life. I
I,
think people
I
do
just
that
don't
for
want to do that. Yeah.
the clicks. I think you've got a much more solid base if you
Hmm.
tell the stories of people, like you're talking about doing. That's why if you go on my show, I hardly ever go live really, because I never really know when I'm going to have my free time. But it's nothing but interviews. I don't
Right.
ever sit around, even if I don't necessarily agree with the guests that I've had on. I would never go back and bash someone because it's not my place. I give them a
No.
platform to tell their story because
And that's
everyone
what
has a
and that's
story.
what it should be about, telling your story. And that's all I wanted to do is tell my story, tell stories of people that I knew that were high profile, organized crime guys, and what my experience was, and really hope to let like a lot of young women not go down the path that I went down, whether it be Italian, any culture
Right.
where, if you go with the bad boy, a lot of times you're going to get pulled into that. And so that's basically where I'm going with my podcast. I shouldn't be a threat to anybody.
Right. And I think you're on the right track. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure it'll continue to grow. I've watched some of the interviews that you've done. You're doing all the right things. So keep at it. We'll put a link to your podcast
Thank
as
you
well
so
as
much.
your book in the show notes on this show. And who knows, maybe we'll get together sometime up in New York. I go up there quite a bit
Oh,
for different
sure.
things. So
Sure.
uh,
Let me know, because if you do, then you could come on I'll coordinate it where you'll come on my show, because my studio is in New York on the Lower East Side where I film out of.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know,
I've got another gentleman I'm coming to see probably later on in the month, so I'll try to
okay.
coordinate it, or maybe I can do both at the same time. I'd love to come on.
All right.
Um,
Sounds great.
all right, well, that'll do it for today's episode on crime and entertainment. I'm Hollywood Wade. That was Andrea Giovino, and unfortunately, we are out of time. Tune in next week for an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. Andrea, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.